Hildy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me, and to you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. And thank you, Commissioner Werfel, for your testimony. I just want to start out by thanking you, and if you wouldn't mind conveying to your staff my gratitude. And when I mention your staff, I don't just mean your senior team that we most often interact with, but with every one of those IRS employees and all the field offices around the country who do a really tough job under difficult circumstances. In one of my past careers, I was the county treasurer, the tax collector for my county, and I know that typically when we are interacting with customers who are paying their taxes, they're not always having their best day. And I know it's a difficult job, and I just want you to convey my gratitude to them for the difficult work that they do, and the fact that in some cases they have to face I think unfair characterizations from some of the people that I work with here in this building. And I just want to express to you that I appreciate their work. I'd also like to thank you for the difficult work that you did during the pandemic, your team, because
Absolutely.
obviously
Yep.
you were not in that position. My constituents in mid-Michigan needed help getting in contact with the IRS just to deal with very simple issues. And I know we had some struggles there. And I think thankfully, because of the investments that we have been able to make with the leadership of President Biden and congressional Democrats, the IRS is in a better position, much better prepared to provide the level of customer service that the American people deserve. And I know you're continuing to work to improve that, and I appreciate that very much. I'd also like to acknowledge the steps that you've taken to make this tax filing season easier for the people I represent by delaying the lower 1099-K reporting requirement. This delay will cut red tape for many taxpayers and allow the IRS to focus on ensuring that those wealthiest individuals that you have referred to a few times in this hearing and those largest corporations can no longer avoid paying the taxes that they owe. The investments that President Biden and Democrats made under the Inflation Reduction Act are also helping expand access to filing, and you've addressed this. I know it's been raised by a number of members, but as has been mentioned, this includes expanding the volunteer income tax assistance and the tax counseling for the elderly programs, which for years have helped the working families that I represent get their taxes filed without having to pay a fee. I understand the point my colleague makes, but I think the point that you make is that we don't ask people to pay a fee for access to those. They are supported by taxpayer dollars, but not an out-of-pocket fee in the moment that need is made. Those programs are operated locally by United Way back home for me. Yep. So the VITA and TCE programs are really important to me. And I wonder, particularly as helping people access the benefits that they deserve, the EITC and child tax credit. And I wonder if you can describe the IRS plan to expand VITA and TCE and what effect you think this will have for the people I represent.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think there is a concerted effort under our modernization plan, we call it our strategic operating plan, to meet taxpayers where they are, and in particular, to figure out how we can connect with vulnerable populations to provide them assistance, often volunteer assistance, so that they have a better understanding of their tax obligations, but also what credits they may be eligible for that they're not receiving. How do we do that? First of all, I think it's absolutely important that we're on the ground. And so we're using new funding to open more walk-in centers, to extend the hours of those walk-in centers, to have Saturday hours, to have special events and taxpayer experience days. In those moments, we can really promote with other local leaders the presence of this opportunity to have a volunteer, and then other tax preparers to know that they can volunteer and be a part of our cadre of volunteers that are doing such important work. I mentioned earlier in the hearing, I participated in one such local event in Baltimore, Maryland, where you had local leaders, taxpayers, volunteers, all talking about the role of these VITA and TCE individuals in that organization and the impact that it's having. And we had taxpayers stand up and tell their stories and how life-changing it was to get the help. And we need to do more of that. Local news was there covering it. That means that we're getting more visibility into these services. Simple things that we can do, like just, for example, we recently created a new page on our website called Free Help, where we're trying to highlight and make it as easy as possible for taxpayers to learn more about these clinics and these volunteers. So there's a big investment and push to reach out to communities and make sure that the IRS is there. And I also mentioned protecting from scams, because it's typically, what's so heartbreaking about these scams and schemes is it's very often the vulnerable population that are exploited. Those that get that phone call from someone pretending to be the IRS, and they don't have an accountant to call to look into it, and they're scared. And I want an IRS that can be there for them to help them understand that this is a scam, and you need to be protected from it, and we want to be there to do that.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence. You have a tough job. The people at the IRS all have a difficult job. We have a difficult job, too. But at the end of the day, we all work for the same people, and I think we can continue to collaborate on ways to improve our service to them. I think we're all better off.
Yeah, and I don't think I've given enough credit in this hearing to the amazing workforce, the IRS, and you mentioned it. The work they did during the pandemic was, I would say for them, they would say it's all in the brochure of being there when taxpayers need them. I think there's a lot of myths about the IRS. One that I learned as soon as I got there, IRS employees care deeply about serving taxpayers. They're passionate about it, and it's inspiring me every day.
Thank you. With that, I really appreciate the indulgence. I yield back.
Ms. Fishbach.
Please fill out the rest of that answer in your response to some of our written questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. I'm interested in seeing that as well. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Chairman Wyden and Ranking Member Crapo, for this important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for illuminating with your research some of the advents that have happened since the IRA. Very much appreciate that, particularly Dr. Conti, your comments as it relates to the marketplace and the stimulus that it provides for innovation. This, I know from my own data, 288,000 Washingtonians are benefiting from the out-of-pocket cap, and so very much appreciate that. But 144,000 Washingtonian seniors will benefit from the negotiated rate. Now, I don't get, I'm kind of with Senator Wyden here, it does feel a little root canal-ish, all this data and information, but I'm just like, I'm perplexed. I am so perplexed. I don't get it. I don't get what people don't understand about giving the federal government, a big purchaser, the right to negotiate. I'm pretty sure I go to the grocery store every night and it says, here's the price for this, but if you buy 3, you get a discount. Pretty sure I have a major employer in my state called Costco, and the entire model is if you buy in bulk, you get a discount. So the only question is, are there people who don't believe that the federal government, a big purchaser, should have the right to buy in bulk? So I like your research because it shows it isn't affecting. Oh, actually, I know a lot of business people that love the bulk concept because why? They can sell more. When we were able to do some things on the Affordable Care Act to allow states to negotiate and buy in bulk, they drove big discounts. And why? Because the private sector stepped up to the plate and said, of course I'd like 100,000 customers or 400,000 customers. So I'm perplexed why someone doesn't believe that giving the federal government, now I know, Mr. Chairman, we had this hearing once before, and there were witnesses who basically said, no, that's not a market power. If it's not a market power, how come everybody in the private sector is using it as a market power? We just want the federal government to have the same market power that the private sector uses, and it is a business concept. So I would like to ask you, this Jardiance is one thing that's driving a big reduction for my constituents. Edmonds resident takes that for diabetes, and now my constituent has a copayment over $500 for a 100-day supply. He's considering cutting the dosing, but if we have something to work out here, they might be able to get that at a cheaper rate. Why isn't that good for everyone? Dr. Conti.
It is good for everyone, put simply. So seniors win by paying lower prices at the pharmacy counter, and we expect adherence will increase and better health will follow. In addition, it is good for pharma companies to have the prices lower. Why? More sales. And with more sales, more revenue is generated.
Well, I thank you. I heard your testimony and I realized she's got it. She understands this. And most people in the private sector do too. And that is why they use it. And that's why they discount, because if you buy in bulk, they get to sell more of their product. The only thing that's happening right now is somebody who's abusing market power are the PBMs. And that's why Senator Grassley and I have tried to take them on over their ability to just throw at the market a price and basically put pharmacies out of business and dictate to everybody. It's not market power, it's market abuse. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, so appreciate this hearing.
Heaven forbid Senator Cantwell brings real common sense and logic to this almost incomprehensible subject. And thanks for the good work on PBMs, not just on your committee, but on this committee where we got a 26-0 vote.
Companies to keep premiums low, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. It's temporary, and the bill's going to come due eventually.
Thank you, Mr. Merkel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get into questions, I want to share some good news about how the IRA is actually helping Nevadans. Thanks to the IRA, 27,900 Nevadans now get approved vaccines for free under Medicare. Over 13,000 seniors in my state have their insulin costs capped at $35 a month. Nearly 100,000 Nevadans saw their ACA health premiums drop by hundreds of dollars each month in the year 2023. Plus, around 4,400 low-income Nevadans are now getting help to afford their prescription medications. Looking ahead, starting in 2025, the year 2025, more than 400,000 Nevadans with Medicare Part D will have their annual prescription drug costs capped at $2,000. This will be a big relief for over 11,500 Nevadans who face high drug costs and are expected to hit the new annual cap. And starting in the year 2026, Medicare will negotiate prices for certain high-cost drugs, which should lower costs for seniors and people with disabilities. That's more than 65,000 Nevadans will benefit from these negotiated prices. And Ms. Aiken, thank you for being here because you have benefited from the IRA, correct?
Absolutely.
And Mr. Merkel, you would not want to take that benefit away from her, would you? Yes
No,
or no? Thank you. So let me follow up here because we've heard from you, but I would love to hear from Dr. Lambrou and Dr. Conti. You've heard this conversation about the IRA. Can you talk about how, listen, I think there are opportunities to always improve legislation, and I'm hoping my colleagues in a bipartisan way will actually want to improve to the benefit of women and men in our states, just like Dr. Aiken, and our children and kids and everybody who should be able to afford health care in this country, including prescription drugs. So you just heard a conversation with Mr. Barrasso, Senator Barrasso. Can you respond to that and talk about the challenges that you just heard from some of the panelists with the IRA, and is there ability to improve upon it, or is there more information that we need to know about the data before we take that next step of improvement? Maybe Dr. Conti, let me start with you.
Thank you. There is evidence that there will be spillovers of direct patient benefit, lower costs, and more expanded use into the commercial insurance sector. But if we want to ensure that commercially insured working men, women, and children get access to the needed drugs they need, we should consider moving guaranteeing those benefits also benefit people who are commercially insured. The other thing that I want to make sure that everyone understands is about innovation incentives. There's actually no evidence of differential clinical programs sunsetting because of the IRA. If anything, the industry is looking for opportunities to bring new medicines to market, and that's because they're facing a generic patent cliff in the next 5 years. And in fact, what the IRA does is shifts incentives for companies to actually do parallel trials across many different indications to bring all of those products or all of those indications to market swifter for them to gain as much revenue as possible. That will have significant benefits to Americans. Why? Because they don't have to wait 10 years for a clinical study to be done to show that this drug works for them. Instead, these indications will happen sooner, and Americans will benefit because of that.
Dr. Lambert, anything else to add?
Yeah, and I think there's an important difference in the Inflation Reduction Act between the drug parts of it and the health coverage parts of it, because in 6 months from now, all the insurance commissioners will be looking to see what do we do, because in 9 months from now, insurers may decide to raise their premiums because in a year from 15 months from now, these tax credits go away. Drug negotiation continues, it expands. The tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act end in 15 months. What that means is that we will really need to look hard at how we engage Congress on preventing inaction from making this happen. And I would say, I know that there's been discussion of fraud. I know Chairman Wyden has a bill to tackle agents and brokers, those few who are fraudulently preying upon middle-income people, signing them up when they didn't mean to be signed up. We should target fraud, period, full stop. But getting rid of these tax credits, which have helped 20 million people afford coverage and led to record low uninsured rates in this country, seems like a step in the wrong direction.
Thank you. And I know my time is up, but at the end of the day, the goal here is to make sure that everyone in this country has access to affordable health care when they need it, and they shouldn't be priced out of it. And from a policy perspective and working with my colleagues, if that is our outcome and our goal in this country, then it makes sense we're going to come together to figure out how to make that happen and set these policies that are a positive with that ultimate outcome, and not to put more money in Big Pharma's pocket or the PBMs or any middleman or anybody in part of it. The outcome should be what is good for the individual patient at the end of the day that needs those drugs, that needs that health care, and it should be affordable. That to me, and I can't imagine anybody at this panel disagrees with that outcome. If you do, please speak up. So I appreciate, thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Senator Daines.
Ranking Member Crapo, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Van Hollen. Thank you, Secretary Yellen, for joining us. We all know that Treasury plays a pretty crucial role keeping our economy strong and stable and strengthening our families' financial security as well. And it plays an indispensable role in keeping our country safe. That's why I have been insisting that we find a solution to address the extremely tight spending caps we are facing, and that any increase in defense spending is at least matched by a much-needed boost in domestic priorities here at home. For starters, Treasury is responsible for absolutely vital sanctions enforcement work to choke off funds to our adversaries like Russia and Iran, not to mention drug cartels and traffickers. It also regulates banks to keep our economy sound, protect our families, and prevent Main Street from paying for Wall Street's mistakes. So I want you to know I'm going to keep working with my colleagues to underscore the need to increase vital non-defense resources at Treasury and so many other agencies. So with that, I do have some questions for you. I wanted to ask you about the Inflation Reduction Act. It invested significant resources in the IRS to improve and modernize the agency. And we have seen immediate benefits, like call wait times decreasing from 28 minutes to 3 minutes. New enforcement initiatives to ensure large corporations and the ultra-wealthy are paying their fair share. And new tools like the direct file, which has made it easier than ever for people to file their taxes, get their refunds. Nearly 14,000 people in Washington State used direct file for their taxes this year, and I'm really excited that the IRS is going to be expanding it to all 50 states next year. it is paramount we preserve these achievements through the annual appropriations process now. So I wanted to ask you, how does the FY25 budget request build upon the success of IRA investments?
Well, direct file was made possible by resources in the Inflation Reduction Act. They enabled us to invest in the IRS and deliver world-class service and develop the direct file, and we intend to continue using those resources to support direct file. We've recently decided to make it permanent. We'll extend to all 50 states. Hopefully, they'll all want to partner with IRS, those resources will be critical to covering the cost.
Does your budget request enable you to be able to expand it to all 50 states?
Yes, in the sense the request includes both an appropriation, annual appropriations, and also an increase in mandatory funding for the IRS, and that combination would enable us to do that.
Okay, very good. The Inflation Reduction Act has tasked the Treasury Department with an indispensable role in fighting the climate crisis. That law included a suite of clean energy tax credits, including the 45V for the production of clean hydrogen. Now, unfortunately, your proposed 45V rulemaking has thrown up some major roadblocks, which a vast coalition, including states, industry, labor have made very clear they're not workable. Washington State is home to one of the cleanest grids and some of the strongest state climate legislation in the country, and is already seeing some of the investments put on hold as a result of the proposed rule. It is no exaggeration to say that getting this rulemaking right may deliver tens of thousands of high-wage jobs while reducing emissions. So I wanted to ask you how you plan to address the concerns you're hearing and make sure that the final 45V rule helps rather than hinders the development of clean hydrogen projects.
Thank you for that question. We've heard a great deal of input on the issue of hydrogen hubs. We asked for input when we issued proposed regulations on how we could identify circumstances where there's minimal risk of significant induced grid emissions. And one of the issues there is how to take account of state policies. And so we have received input, and we're going to take that input into account as we revise the regulation.
Okay, so can you assure me when the final regulation comes out, we will see a better regulation to make sure our states can actually use these investments?
We will certainly try to address this issue.
Okay, I will look forward to seeing that. It's really critical for our hydrogen hub.
I hear you.
2 years ago, I helped pass a sweeping bipartisan retirement bill, Secure 2.0 Act. It's really important to me that Americans can retire with dignity. So I want to thank you for Treasury's guidance on the emergency savings. I know stakeholders are anxiously awaiting further guidance on provisions like the student loan match. Do you have at Treasury sufficient resources to implement these popular bipartisan measures?
Yes, we do, and we appreciate the support that you provided us this fiscal year, and we don't need additional resources. This is something we're going to get done.
Okay, very good. And finally, in the American Rescue Plan, Democrats expanded the child tax credit and lifted 5.3 million people out of poverty. That expansion nearly cut child poverty rates in half from the previous year, but that progress is being reversed with the expiration now of the CTC. I helped reintroduce that child care tax credit, which would expand and make it permanent. Can you talk about the immediate and long-term benefits expanding the CTC would have on working and middle-class families?
Well, I think it would be dramatic, and as you pointed out, in 2021, CTC is credited with having, it's the leading driver behind a 46% reduction in child poverty. There were record lows in Black, Hispanic, and Native American and Asian and white child poverty. And, you know, beyond the immediate reduction in child poverty, research also suggests that this kind of income support brings long-term gains in children's health, education, and earnings. So I think this is something that can have a profound effect on children and their well-being and futures.
Talk a little bit about how the president's budget request addresses child poverty.
Well, the president has requested in this budget request to expand the child tax credit and to make permanent full refundability and also advanceability. So we certainly would like to see the amounts increased and see full refundability.
Okay, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Granholm, in the time since President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, communities across the country are already benefiting from historic investments in clean energy and climate resilience. In fact, right here in the District of Columbia that I represent, the Inflation Reduction Act is enabling the General Services Administration to upgrade federal government buildings from fossil fuel steam power to electric heat pump technology. The upgrades to the Ronald Reagan Building and the International Trade Center alone will strengthen our climate future and are expected to save more than $6.2 million in taxpayer dollars every year. So, Secretary Granholm, how are projects like this one transforming communities across the country?
We are very interested in all projects that are community-based, by the way, that reduce costs for people. And so whether it is energy efficiency or the generation of clean energy and giving people the ability to take control of their own energy future in partnership with communities and on an individual basis. So we are all in on all manner of efficiency and energy and supporting communities in doing so.
Both the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law are critical investments in our country's future. Within the first year of the Inflation Reduction Act's enactment, we added 170,000 new jobs in clean energy and climate resilience, with a projection of more than 1.5 million additional new jobs over the next decade. Secretary Granholm, how has President Biden's investing in America, in America's energy, created new jobs and opportunities across the country, including the energy sector?
Yep, to your point, so far it's about 800,000 jobs that have been created as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, with the projection that it will be 1.5 million. We've created over 15 million jobs. Over 15 million jobs have been created since this president took office, more than any president in any term in American history. And part of that has to do with the focus on clean energy and the opportunity that it brings to employ people.
According to the Department of Energy, because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, by 2030, we are projected to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% at 2005 levels. It is also projected that clean energy electricity will account for 80% of the power generation by 2030, compared with 42% in 2022. In addition, President Biden's leadership will help families save up to $38 billion in electricity bills by the end of the decade. So, Senator Granholm, how have the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law enabled the Department of Energy to invest in clean energy and fossil fuel alternatives?
It's the statistics that you cite are so wonderful because they happen to be accurate, and that 40% reduction in CO2 emissions, it's actually 40 to 50% if you include what the private sector is doing and what other states are doing. What these laws have done is enabled both the federal government but also the private sector to really do the investments because they contain carrots. And we're all about the carrots at the Department of Energy. So the grants from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act have created an environment where America has become the irresistible nation for investment in clean energy. We are the envy of other nations for having been so forward-leaning on creating jobs here. So it's a very exciting time for both responsiveness to addressing climate change, but also creating jobs in America.
I'm proud we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I'm thankful for the Biden administration's leadership in addressing the climate crisis and securing our country's energy future, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, Americans got another piece of excellent news in the fight against inflation. According to the Department of Labor, the Consumer Price Index was measured at 2.5% in August compared to a year ago. This floor chart illustrates just that. 2 years ago, 2 years after we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS and Science, inflation has now slowed to a 3-year low. Here's what it was in 2022. Here's what it is right now. It went from 8.3% when the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act were passed to 2.5% today. Let me repeat. 2 years after the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act, inflation has slowed to a 3-year low. Republicans claimed investing in America would make inflation skyrocket and drive our economy into a recession. Instead, the U.S. has had the strongest post-COVID recovery in the world. Manufacturing construction at an all-time high, nearly triple its peak during the last administration. And inflation continues to trend lower. And inflation has slowed despite Senate Republicans trying to block and derail so many of the bills we pushed in this chamber to lower costs and make life easier for American families. Remember, when Republicans had a chance to vote for lower prescription drug costs for seniors, they voted no. When Republicans had a chance to cap insulin at $35 a month for Americans on Medicare, they voted no. When Republicans had the chance to dramatically expand the child tax credit and cut child poverty in this country in half, they voted no. And when Republicans had the chance to invest in rebuilding America and bringing advanced manufacturing jobs back to our shores and open new factories for EVs and solar and chips, many of them still voted no, though then back home they tried to take credit for these jobs. For 3 years, Republicans have proudly been the party of no. No solutions, no plans, no attempts to fix our country's problems. But today's report shows that the Democratic agenda is working. This is dramatic. And despite Republicans' best efforts to derail our country's recovery, we've moved forward in a very positive way. We have a lot of work still to do. People still need a lot of help to make ends meet and save for retirement and provide for their families, but we're on our way. We are on our way, as this chart shows.
Debates before we get to rates, I want to keep pushing this notion of technology transformation in healthcare, how we actually recoup some of that.
Let me say here, I want to work with you on it. I think this is extraordinarily important. It hasn't gotten enough attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Helmy's next.
Thank you, Chairman. As someone who spent nearly a decade working in healthcare and helping run the most diverse state in the nation, I'm going to focus on access. And I applaud the work of our chairman in this committee. The resources that provided by legislation that came out of this committee has increased access and allowed for healthier communities that become more innovative and economically viable communities. And I'll spend some time on that as well. But it also allowed states like New Jersey, where the Murphy administration was able to take the resources provided by the chairman and the members of this committee, expand on them to provide more access and more care, which has led to increases in insured populations and in healthier communities. Dr. Conte and Dr. Lambrew, if I may, you both have extensive leadership experience, and I'd ask you, with your studies in advocacy and healthcare access across diverse populations, as mentioned, we're the most diverse state in the union. Give me the impact, please, of the IRA financial resources on healthcare access for low-income communities, communities of color, and migrant communities. Specifically, if I may, Dr. Conte, as I think policymakers spend a lot of time talking, there's been some conversation on committee about the costs input, but not the economic viability that comes with long-term healthcare access and affordability, both on a physical well-being of a community and the economic well-being of a community. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. With lower prices of prescription drugs, not only do seniors in general benefit, but seniors of color benefit. Communities that are low income or low middle income directly benefit from IRA provisions. In addition, we expect when people are not choosing between paying for their medicine and paying for groceries or rent, that adherence to therapies that are effective and that are cost effective will go up, and therefore better health, better control of diabetes, better control and treatment for cancer will follow.
And I would add that we do know that lacking health coverage is one of the major causes of health disparities by race and ethnicity. So in the marketplace, what we have seen is a tremendous growth in our Hispanic, Latino, Native American, across the board, populations that historically don't have employer-based coverage, have been left out of the system. The tax credits in this policy, the increased choices that have resulted, have allowed those individuals and communities to come in, get covered, and we do know that having coverage increases preventive services use, helps people manage chronic illness better. It prevents all-cause mortality, and going back to those community effects, it means that that family may be able to afford childcare. They'll be more food secure. They may be able to afford rent. So we know that there's significant impact of being insured. There's 2 decades worth of research on this.
Thank you. Dr. Lambrew, if I can stay with you, as I mentioned, sort of the economics of this, access is also a critical element to any innovation economy and a growth of economies, specifically when you talk about the startup of small businesses. If you could you speak to the impact of these subsidies on innovation and entrepreneurship, maybe with some specifics on expected growth if we're able to make healthcare more accessible and more affordable? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think one of the untold stories of the Affordable Care Act is exactly that. It has filled in that gap for people starting businesses, people striking out on their own. And we know from older data that in 2021, 2.6 million, or 1 out of 5 marketplace enrollees, were either a business owner, small business owner, or an entrepreneur. That must have grown because we also know that the uninsured rate for those 2 groups of people went from 27%, 25%, in 2013 to a record low of 16% in 2022. Again, this is during pandemic. Those are extraordinary facts. Since the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2014, 50 million people have come into the marketplace to get coverage, usually, again, between jobs, starting new businesses, and I think we have a sense, especially in a state like mine, that it's really made a difference. We merged our individual and small group market in Maine. We're providing reinsurance through the Affordable Care Act for our small businesses as well. So if this policy is not extended, it will have significant harm for those small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Dr. Lambrew. I'd just like to close, Mr. Chairman, by thanking all the witnesses for participating in this dialogue, and specifically you, Ms. Aiken, for your very personal story. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
I thank my colleague for his important questions. So senators are all coming in, so we're going to stay with the order of appearance. And Senator Bennett, you are next, if you can
catch
your
Mr.
breath
Chairman.
and go.
Thank you for the panel for being here, and I appreciate our new member on the committee. I guess it's for Dr. Conte. We spend $4.5 trillion, more than 17% of our GDP on health care, which is twice as much as other industrialized nations spend on average, and yet Americans die earlier than our.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to pick up right there. I am very proud of the work that this committee and Congress has done on the prescription drug pricing issues, the Inflation Reduction Act capping insulin, capping and then progressively reducing out-of-pocket costs for folks under Medicare Part D, negotiated pricing, supported all of those things. The great thing about the IRA, it passed by one vote, so I'm telling everybody I was the deciding vote on all of these matters. We were all the deciding vote, all of us who voted yes, and some of those provisions weren't loved by the pharmaceutical companies, but I voted for them, and I'm proud of them. But I have come to conclude, along with a number of my colleagues, that the focus on pharmaceutical companies is something I support. We're letting PBMs get away scot-free. One company, one industry researches, one doesn't. One industry produces life-saving treatments, one doesn't. One industry is super-duper profitable and another one profitable, but the one that's the super-duper profitable is the one that's not doing any research and not producing any life-saving innovations. One industry is under fairly intense scrutiny by this committee in Congress, and one isn't, and it's the one that's the super-duper profitable one that is not researching and not producing products that is getting away scot-free. In May of 2023, we passed a great bill out of this committee. I think it was actually 4 bills, and if I remember by memory, I think the votes were 18-3, 18-3, 19-2, and 20-1. Overwhelming bipartisan bills, finally, to regulate PBMs. And I'm disappointed that those bills haven't gone anywhere. I turn on my TV and I see the PBMs running all kinds of ads against Congress, telling Congress, not to vote for the scary PBM reform bill. If we're going to bring prescription drug prices down even more, we shouldn't let up on having Mr. Jorgensen and other CEOs here and pressing them, but we got to get serious about the PBM reform piece of it. Mr. Jorgensen, you were here. I'm just going to go into this. You were here in May of 2023, and I asked you a question about the connection between list price and formulary placement. And I will say, Chairman Sanders, this was the single best hearing I've attended in 12 years in the Senate, the hearing where you had both the PBMs and the pharmacy CEOs together, because you're familiar with the phenomenon that everybody blames the party that's not in the room. We had them all at the same table. You and your 2 CEO colleagues testified that PBMs prefer the drug with the higher list price, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to get a formulary placement for a drug with a lower list price. And that's because they often make a profit on the discount or rebate they can negotiate off a list price. And this perverse incentive artificially keeps drug prices too high. So then I followed up and asked this question to the PBM witnesses. And I asked about this. And as you might expect, they were not direct in their answer. I asked one witness, quote, "So you do not have any fee structure in your company where you collect a fee based on the percentage of the list price?" The response I received after a long pause, "We certainly may have a few in our client base." Everybody in the room knew that answer was a complete dodge, and that was over a year ago. Senators Marshall, Tester, and I have been working for over a year on a bill that would address this issue. The Drug Act would delink the list price of a drug from PBM profits in favor of a flat fee. We had hoped that might have been included in the markup this Thursday. I'm sorry that it won't be, but we're going to continue to make it happen. Color me skeptical that an industry that is now giving us pie-in-the-sky statements about what they're willing to do, but that's also buying advertisements on TV trying to attack Congress for doing PBM reform. Color me skeptical that they're going to come to the table and suddenly, have a conversion experience and start doing the right thing. But I guess one evidence of whether they're doing the right thing is, since you were here in May of 2023, have PBMs changed their practices, or are they continuing to favor higher priced drugs on the formulary and make it difficult to put lower priced drugs on the formulary?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. We have not seen a wide uptake of the insulins where we lowered the price. They can always find special formularies where they're present, but we have reduced access to those insulins compared to other insulins. So like you, I'm also a bit skeptical, but I'm willing to explore the opportunity of what we can do together, all of us, to benefit patients living with these diseases.
As a general matter, you might think if the PBM saw the Help Committee vote a bill out to the floor that was going to put some significant regulation on it by an overwhelming bipartisan margin, they would think, man, maybe we better improve a little bit. I've seen no evidence of improvement. I see ads on TV attacking Congress and telling them not to do PBM reform. So I want to get the balance right here. I'm going to continue to vote with this committee to focus on pharmaceutical companies and bring down prices. And if the pharmaceutical companies don't want to negotiate for prescription drug pricing under Medicare, I stand with those who think negotiation is a good idea. But we're letting a huge part of this problem that afflicts the everyday American who's trying to afford prescription drugs, we're letting them go scot-free. And we've got a good bill on the floor right now that I think with some improvement could do a great job. And I hope we'll take it up, and I hope we'll devote the same attention and focus to the PBMs as we do to the pharma companies. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Senator Brunn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had so many discussions like this, and I wish I had a big something to hold.
Here's what the law we've already passed has done for the first time ever. Every year from this point on, every year, calendar year, Medicare will negotiate the cost of additional prescription drugs. Earlier this year, I announced that Medicare reached an agreement with drug manufacturers on 10 new drugs that Medicare picked and said we're going to negotiate. The most common, most expensive drugs that treat everything from kidney disease to arthritis to blood cancer and more. These new low prices for all 10 drugs will go into effect in January 2026 and cut the prices on those 10 drugs by between 40 and 80%. Next year, Medicare will negotiate another lower price, for 15 additional drugs. And every year thereafter, till we get after 20 drugs, until every drug is covered that's on the market. Every one. It's already passed. Folks, it isn't just saving seniors money. I said, it's also saving taxpayers billions of dollars because Medicare will no longer have to pay exorbitant prices to pharma. Over the next 10 years, just so far, the newer lower drug prices and other reforms, we've cut the federal deficit by $160 billion, while he raised it by $200 billion. I'm serious. Think about it. Look, I'm a capitalist. I was listed for 36 years as the poorest man in Congress, but I'm still a capitalist. You think I'm kidding? I got a phone call. I was campaigning for a colleague who was no longer around, but was up in this neck of the woods in Vermont, not Bernie, but his predecessor. And I got a phone call from my wife. She said, Joe. Well, actually, I called home. When I'm away, I called to see how the kids are doing before she goes off to teach. I said, hey, Joe, how are you? Fine. You know you're in trouble when you get that answer. I give my words by the true story. He said, did you read today's paper? I said, honey, they don't have the Wilmington News Journal up here. She said, well, headline, Biden, poorest man in Congress. Is that true? I don't know, but I guess I was for 36 years. I never thought I didn't have any money, but I had a good salary. Look, but I'm a capitalist. And without competition, it's not capitalism, it's exploitation. When Big Pharma doesn't play by the rules, competitors can't offer lower-priced drugs and devices to carry those drugs. So prices stay artificially high. And look, but we're taking action.
Good morning, everyone. Got a full house here today. It's great. Well, first of all, let me thank everyone for being here today and coming into the auditorium And on behalf of AHN and Highmark Health, it is our special privilege to welcome U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to Pittsburgh to offer her few remarks on health care, access, and affordability. We also are pleased to welcome U.S. Congresswoman Summer Lee. Secretary Yellen and Congresswoman Lee have had a busy morning already touring our new Skin Cancer Center at West Penn and participating in a roundtable discussion with healthcare economic and several AHN healthcare providers and community leaders. Before we turn to the microphone, over to the Congresswoman and the Secretary, I want to express our gratitude, not just for the Secretary's visit to our hospital in the city, but for the incredible stewardship over the last 3 years. Without your leadership and without the continued support of the Biden administration, the healthcare sector and the entire U.S. economy would be in a much different place than it is today. We appreciate all you have done and for your career in public service. From the Federal Reserve to the U.S. Treasury, from her time in academia. For the last 3 decades, Secretary Yellen has been one of the world's most important shapers of economic policy, and we are thrilled to be learning from her today. But before we hear from the Secretary, we're going to ask, and we are excited to hear from Congresswoman Lee. Congresswoman?
Thank you, former executive. You keep that title, right?
Yeah, I guess I am.
Yeah, I'm never sure. I just want to be polite. But good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Allegheny Health Network and West Penn Hospital for hosting us this morning. And as our former executive said, it was an incredible tour. So thank you so much to all the doctors who took us on this morning's tour to show us the innovative work that's happening here, to our nurses and healthcare workers for your tireless work day in and day out to help those who need it the most, to the patients who shared their stories with us at the roundtable, and especially to Secretary Yellen and President Biden for working with Congress to make healthcare more accessible and more affordable. And that's why we're here today, to center the healthcare savings made available through the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act. These pieces of legislation are lowering the cost of prescription drug prices for Medicare beneficiaries, including free life-saving vaccines. The IRA reins in pharmaceutical price gouging. It enables the federal government to hold drug makers accountable to patients by making sure they can't overcharge for needed medicines like insulin. And for our most vulnerable populations, the legislation improved the Medicare subsidy, giving much needed relief to low-income enrollees like seniors or persons with disabilities who struggle with the ever-increasing costs of prescriptions. For more than 1 million Pennsylvanians with diabetes, 76,000 folks in my district alone, we won the fight to ensure that if you have health insurance, you'll pay no more than $35 for your insulin. Now we're fighting to cap the price of insulin and other expensive medication for every person, no matter their insurance status, and expand these caps to other medications you need to keep your families healthy. For 2.8 million Medicare beneficiaries in Pennsylvania, we won the fight to give Medicare the power to negotiate dramatically lower costs for the 10 most expensive medications to treat blood clots, diabetes, and more. This is why I'm in Congress fighting to expand Medicare coverage for every American. Yet, as we promote these positive healthcare gains for patients, families, and vulnerable populations, we must remain vigilant and committed to addressing gaps in care and equity and in supporting our healthcare workers. This is why I've introduced legislation to increase hazard pay for healthcare workers and been on the front lines of the fight to ensure all nurses have what our AHN nurses, union nurses have secured through their historic contract: fair pay, safe staffing, and dignity on the job to care for their patients. And Congress will continue fighting to expand healthcare access and equity by passing Medicare for All one day, which will ensure every person in any age, income, or background has high-quality healthcare. I'm committed to working with the administration on these initiatives and to listening to personal stories from our local healthcare workers and leaders and patients as we move to improve healthcare access and services moving forward. So we thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much to the Secretary for coming here and joining us.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. Before I bring up the next speaker, I do want to thank all of you and all of our workers throughout our system because you have put us on the map. You got the attention of the Biden administration, and you got some very high-level officials here today that want to tour our facilities and hear from all of you on what we've been doing here to change the quality of health care and the access to people in Western Pennsylvania. So let's give a nice, warm welcome to the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. Secretary, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here in Pittsburgh at West Penn Hospital to see the exciting innovations in healthcare and to hear about how your system is improving access and reducing costs for Americans to be able to get the health care they deserve. I also want to talk about what the Biden administration is doing to lower costs. Over the past 3 years, the Biden administration has driven the strongest economic comeback of our lifetimes. Our country has seen particularly strong GDP growth, and inflation has cooled sooner and more quickly following the pandemic than in other large advanced economies. This morning's report on inflation underscores the significant progress we have made in our fight to bring down inflation. Overall inflation is down by around 2/3 since its peak. The prices of key household expenses like gas, eggs, and airline fares have gone down. In January, the headline Consumer Price Index declined to 3.1%, and that's 6 percentage points below its peak in June of 2022. And at the same time, the recession that many forecasters predicted we would need to see to get inflation down, that hasn't materialized. Instead, the American economy continues to grow, and we also have an historically strong labor market. More Americans are working, and unemployment has been below 4% for the longest streak in 50 years. Household median wealth grew by 37% between 2019 and 2022, and that is the largest 3-year increase on record. And because real wages, which is wages after inflation, they've gone up, Americans have more purchasing power. A worker earning the median wage can today better. So we're pursuing an economic agenda that does this, from investing in infrastructure and manufacturing to create well-paying jobs to lowering costs. Our work to give families more breathing room starts with energy costs. I traveled to Boston last month, where I talked about how the administration took action after Russia's invasion of Ukraine to prevent spikes in energy costs. Though we're focused on making historic investments in transitioning toward clean energy in the medium and long run, record domestic oil and natural gas production have addressed our immediate needs. Energy prices have declined over the past year and a half, with gas now down around $1.90 a gallon from its high in June of 2022. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, taxpayers can also claim credits for energy improvements that will allow them to save on their utility bills. And in the years to come, the IRA will lower costs for clean energy technologies, making clean energy even more affordable for American families. For decades, healthcare costs have also put pressures on the budgets of middle-class households. Here in Pennsylvania, healthcare spending per capita has increased since the 1990s. Across the country, middle-income households spend around 1/5 of their income on healthcare-related expenses, and almost half of all adults say it's difficult to afford healthcare costs. These high costs have real impacts. 1 in 5 adults report they haven't filled a prescription because of the cost. 1 in 10 say they've cut pills or skipped doses. I had an early view into the importance of health care since my father was a doctor, but all of us have experienced firsthand and seen for our families and friends what a difference access to good health care makes. The President and I believe it's unacceptable that some Americans need to choose between their health and other needs, like putting food on the table. And this isn't just a public health issue, it's an economic one. As Treasury Secretary, I see the strain high health care costs can put on family budgets and know that families need more breathing room. And having affordable health care leads to stronger financial security for middle-class families. It saves Americans and our country money. And for all these reasons, the President and I are committed to ensuring that Americans can afford the care that they deserve. Since the start of this administration, we've worked to make affordable health care, including prescription drugs, a reality for more Americans. The prior administration tried to roll back the Affordable Care Act, jeopardizing protections for pre-existing conditions. Consistently undermined health care exchanges where Americans can sign up for the plans they want. From 2016 to 2020, enrollment stayed flat. In contrast, over 8 million Americans have gained coverage since President Biden took office. In 2022, the uninsured rate dropped to an historic low of just under 8%. And in the open enrollment period that ended just a few weeks ago, over 21 million Americans signed up for health care coverage through the Affordable Care Act's marketplace, and this is an all-time record. As we've expanded coverage, we've saved families hundreds of dollars, and let me just explain how we did this. First, we started with premiums. The American Rescue Plan lowered costs for health care by expanding tax credits. Families save an average of $40 per person per month on premiums, and 1/3 of customers find coverage for $10 or less per month. The Inflation Reduction Act extended the American Rescue Plan's low premiums. Nearly 15 million people are saving an average of $800 per year. Second, because the drug companies shouldn't be able to unfairly profit off hardworking Americans, the IRA helps level the playing field by allowing Medicare to negotiate prices for key prescription drugs. This is projected to reduce the deficit by over $95 billion. The IRA also requires drug companies to pay rebates to Medicare if they raise prices faster than inflation, because there's no justification for this same drug becoming more expensive over time. In 2023, these rebates saved some seniors on Medicare using these drugs as much as $600 per dose. Third, the IRA lowers the cost of common health treatments. It caps the cost of insulin at $35 a month for Medicare beneficiaries. For many with Medicare, it also makes important vaccines available with no out-of-pocket costs, and it caps out-of-pocket spending on prescription drugs. This prescription drug cap is projected to lead to annual savings of $400 per person. Beyond the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, we're also taking action to fight against unfair and surprise bills that hurt everyday Americans. We're working to give Americans more predictability and control from protecting consumers from unfair medical debt to cracking down on misleading insurance products that result in medical bills of thousands of dollars. Well, there are other actions the President and I would like to take to bring healthcare costs down even more. That includes making the low premiums we've put in place permanent. We also need to make sure Americans access the support that's available. For example, we're doing all we can so that everyone eligible for Medicaid or CHIP coverage knows that they must take action to renew their coverage because states restarted their annual Medicaid and CHIP reviews last year. And I encourage anyone here who's eligible to complete their renewal if they haven't yet done so. We're also progressing full steam ahead on other priorities, such as increasing transparency in healthcare plans so that Americans aren't stuck in plans that don't meet their needs. Across all our work, we remain focused on fairness, working to narrow gaps in coverage and in care. The work we've done and have ahead on healthcare is crucial, and it's motivated by the same values that motivate much of our economic agenda. By making healthcare more accessible and affordable, we're helping middle-class Americans live healthier, more financially secure lives. These Americans are at the heart of our economy, and they'll continue to drive our country's success. So thank you all for allowing me to visit this impressive healthcare center and for joining me today. Thank you.